call the meeting to order. This is the Planning Commission. I want to welcome everybody who is here. We have, let me get the Planning Commission, oh, here it is. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to call for an approval of the minutes of October 9th.
So moved.
I'll second. It has been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye. I'm sorry, we have to do a roll call. Sorry.
Roll call.
Okay, sorry.
That's
Okay.
why you do that.
Matt,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Agree.
Maureen,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
and John.
Yes.
Thank you. The minutes are approved. I don't believe there is a report of the chair and vice chair tonight. Is there a report from the director?
No report tonight, thank you.
Thank you. Moving right along. We have the first public hearing, which is on the home replacement at approximately 828 West Duluth Street. And the case is being presented by Chris Earl.
Members of the commission, good evening. The first item in front of you today is a request by Bill Whitaker, the property owner of approximately 828 West Duluth Avenue, for a conditional use approval to demolish the existing single-family residence and construct a new single-family residence in its place. The project is before the commission because the proposed single-family residence is located in the M2 heavy manufacturing zoning district. In this, or replacement of single-family detached dwellings, two-family dwellings, or twin homes in an M1 or M2 zoning district require a conditional use process. The process looks at compatibility, location, configuration, and potential impacts of the request. Conditional uses are allowed uses of appropriate conditions can be imposed to mitigate any adverse impacts. The proposed single-family residence will be approximately 720 square feet. It will have a shed-style roof and an approximate height of 13 feet 4 inches. The primary material for the exterior is a cementitious vertical siding to be painted. In addition to the principal structure, there will be a approximately 288 square foot carport, as well as the 276 square foot concrete pad to provide its required off-street parking. The subject property where the house will be built is approximately 12,155 square feet. The project is located within the Swedetown neighborhood of the Capitol Hill Master Planning Area, kind of in the northwest area of Salt Lake City. It is primarily zoned as an M2 heavy manufacturing district. It does have some M1 bordering it to the northeast. Historically, the Swedetown area was home to several hundred residences. Industrial uses have been allowed in Swedetown since 1927. Due to unrestricted development until 1955 and the refinement of the zoning or of industrial zoning over the years, new residences are no longer permitted. Therefore, the number of residences has reduced to less than 50. The Swedetown area has transformed into an industrial and manufacturing area surrounding a small group of single-family residential properties. This map kind of shows just a portion of the Swedetown area. If you look up in the top right corner, the area in red is the subject property. One street south of that is the Swedetown Park, as well as a couple of residences. To the west of the subject property, you'll also see a couple of single-family residences as well. And then southwest of the subject property, you'll see within the two streets there, there's a large cluster of single-family homes that still exist in this area. The surrounding areas are generally, most of them are used for storage. There's not much manufacturing that kind of surrounds the area. Most of it's vehicle storage, equipment storage, material storage, that kind of a thing. The suite, or let's see. This slide is just, or the next few slides will just kind of show the site and surrounding areas. This picture is the subject house to be demolished. Here you'll see the north and south side of Duluth Avenue. To the northeast, the building up there is just a truck parts and repair building. To the northwest, you'll see a couple of residential structures. And then on the south side of the road is just vehicle and equipment storage. These are just some examples of the residential houses that are in the neighborhood. The M2 zoning district does not permit new single-family residences, and the Capitol Hill Master Plan future land use promotes industrial and commercial uses. However, due to the large-scale nature of an industrial use, the smaller existing residential lots are more appropriate in size for residential use rather than industrial or heavy manufacturing use. Because of this, the complete vacation of residential use is unlikely to happen. Based on these, or based on this presentation and the details provided in the staff report, the planning staff finds that the project meets the standards of approval for conditional use and is recommending commission approve the project.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Chris? Is the applicant here?
They were supposed to be, but I do not see them.
Okay. Is there anyone from the we'll open a public hearing. And is there anyone from the community council of this area, Capitol Hill Community Council here? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this project? Thank you. I'll close the public hearing. Is there any discussion from the commission? Questions?
For the staff, when we rezone a set of property or redone it in the master plan, I mean, even with these smaller lots, the intent seems to be like it was that they would be acquired and consolidated and built out. And it seems like putting new construction goes against that, and your staff plan kind of notes that, and it notes it in the standards, right? So it's the standard 3 or 2, sorry, but we just kind of are disregarding it because you think that that won't happen. Is that correct?
We're not necessarily disregarding it. The master plan does state moving more towards an industrial and commercial, but we feel it's a better use of that property than to just allow the existing residential structure to sit in disrepair with the chance
The current
that,
residential structure occupied?
No. It's not occupied. It hasn't been condemned or made unsafe for occupation, but it was evaluated by a private contractor, which they determined that demolition would be a more appropriate means to than trying to repair what's currently there.
Is the applicant the current owner of that
Yes.
And have they owned it for a while, or are they a new owner?
They've owned it for quite a while, yes.
And is their intent to live on it personally or to rent it, or what's the intent?
Their intent is to have it for rent,
For rent.
Yep. More of a low-income rent.
All right, thanks.
So I'm wondering, Chris, on this, do we have landscape requirements? Because the applicant intends to keep using the north end for the storage and their shipping containers, and do we have landscape requirements if we allow this to be residential use? Because there's nothing here right now.
Yes, the front yard will be landscaped. The applicant does plan on landscaping the rear yard as well. All of the equipment, one of the requirements for the zoning review when it goes to building permits is to remove all of that equipment. It does have to be a residential use. It can't be mixed use with manufacturing elements in it. So all of that equipment will be removed. So it will be strictly residential use.
And there's no health and safety concerns?
Just based on the fact that these residences have been here for over 100 years, there hasn't been any issues with them to date. There's no concern that this would change by replacing this structure.
Any other questions or comments? Are you the applicant? Would you like to come and say something to the planning commission? Okay.
Yeah,
Would you state your name for the record, please?
yes, Bill Whitaker.
And speak into the microphone as much as you can.
Bill Whitaker,
Thank you.
yes. My thought for the property is to, not only to get rid of the old house that's falling apart, but to provide a home for maybe a single low-income person or veteran or something like that, knowing that there's a great need in the city for housing. And it's not that intend to be a wealthy developer or something like that, but I would like to do a small part. I don't think I'm going to make a lot of money on this project, if any, with rent. I go home as probably everybody here to a nice, comfortable place. I'd like to provide that for a person or two. That's my comment.
Okay.
Any questions or concerns?
Any questions for the applicant? You can move back. Is there anyone present who would like to speak regarding this now that we have heard from the applicant? If not, I will close the public hearing again, just in case. Okay. Planning Commission, do you have any other questions or concerns? Or do I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. Okay, regarding petition PLN PCM 2019-00552, based on the information listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the request for the conditional use to replace the existing single-family residential structure with a new single-family residential structure at 828 West Duluth Avenue as presented in petition PLN PCM 2019-00552 with the conditions listed in the staff report.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Carolyn and a second by Maureen. Any other comments? We'll start with John.
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Amy?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
And Matt?
Yes.
The motion passes. Thank you. So our next agenda item is a text amendment for increased height limits in part of the GMU zone. It is being presented by Christopher Lee. We have a lot of Chris's here tonight.
Good evening, Commissioners. How are you doing? This is regarding a text amendment for increased height in a certain portion of the GMU zone. And it is crossed portions of three blocks that are located between 500 West and the railroad tracks which are approximately 625 west and 200 south and 400 south. And as I said, the requested text amendments specifically focused on building height. And the petition is specifies that the maximum building height on corner lots would increase from the current maximum of 120 feet up to 190 feet. And mid-block areas would have a maximum building height of 100 feet, but they are saying that additional height could be requested through a design review process. And this is to illustrate the exact area that we're talking about. The red lines illustrate that. It's the area directly between the intermodal hub for UTA and the Rio Grande Station down on 500 West. And within the larger zoning area, you can see where it's located. It's a portion of the GMU zone. GMU extends a little bit to the south of it and then up towards the north also. And then it's flanked to the east by D3 and then D4 and eventually D1 in the central downtown core. The two guiding documents that really guided our review on this were Plan Salt Lake and the Downtown Master Plan. And within both these documents, there are elements that support the increased height, such as increased growth housing options, and housing options immediately adjacent to transit. But there are two major sticking points, which is the urban design element and the district's initiative section in the downtown master plan. And this is an illustration of the urban design element. And the language that's listed here comes directly from the master plan. It talks about the overall design that has been programmed in for Salt Lake City. Basically what it boils down to is from the downtown, the central downtown business district, going towards the west and towards the south, there's supposed to be a sloping pyramid shape on those sides that just gradually slopes down with the highest concentration, the highest height in the middle of the downtown area. And then this specific area is mentioned within as the catalytic project for the Depot District within the downtown master plan. And there's a couple elements here where the urban design for this area emphasizes smaller blocks bounded by streets, walkways, pocket parks, and plazas. And it also, 300 South has been designated as a reduced width festival street with complementary buildings that are 6 to 12 stories in height. And with that being the case and trying to break up these blocks, it doesn't seem in line with increasing the height up to a maximum of 190 feet from what it can be right now at 120 feet. And I should also mention that the baseline height in the GMU zone is 75 feet for flat roof buildings. If the building has a peak to it, if there's a slope to the roof, then they can go up to 95 feet. It's only through going through the design review process that people can potentially get up to the maximum of 120 feet. And so with this, the master plan that's been established and this catalytic project right here within this area, steps have already been taken to comply with what's been established by the city. And the first of those was in 2014. Partial street closure was done along both sides of 300 South and effectively narrowed down that street. It doesn't look like it right now if you go out and look at it. It's just a typical very wide street. But it has been narrowed with the idea that when development happens down there, that buildings will be placed much closer to the street and it will be a focus more on a pedestrian street, and there will still be automobile access most likely, but it's trying to create a much more intimate area. And going along with that, within the plan, it talks about having an approximate ratio of buildings on each side of the street that, like it says, goes between 6 to 12 stories. With the street being 85 feet, it's spoken about a 1-to-1 ratio of going up to about 85 feet in height for buildings. The way that the zoning is right now, 120 feet is the maximum that can get there, so it's fairly close. At 190 feet, you'd be almost doubling that ratio, so it'd be more like 2-to-1 instead of 1-to-1. And then another element where the city has tried to move towards meeting the goals of the master plan is in 2017, this area was rezoned specifically to GMU, the current zoning. And at that point, if the objective had been to allow for higher buildings, then they could have, proposed other zoning to take place there. But they settled on the GMU zone with that maximum height, as I've mentioned previously. So with that, due to the elements outlined in the presentation, the staff report, planning staff is of the opinion that the Planning Commission should forward a negative recommendation to the City Council regarding this petition.
Are there any questions for Christopher?
Yeah, I have a question. Has the property owner, the RDA, taken a position on this petition? Do we know what they think about it?
The RDA made a statement. They provided it in the staff report. I don't have it right in front of me, but it is in the comment section. I think they specifically mentioned that they didn't think that there should be a minimum height, in the mid-block areas or anything like that. They want to be able to maintain the plan that they have with some smaller buildings. It was my understanding they got some feedback from other people who are looking at some of the RDA property down there that they didn't want to be forced to come up to, any minimum heights that was too high, that went beyond what they were planning on.
So Chris, I know you mentioned in the staff report, just northeast, the block that has the highest potential at 375 feet. What is the highest building we currently have in downtown? Do you know? I mean, I know that may not correspond to.
You mean directly north of this parcel, or?
Well, yeah, in the staff report, you identified that one area that has a higher height zoning at 375 feet. Doesn't mean that
Right.
that's what's there, but do we know what the highest building is currently in downtown Salt Lake?
Well, I think that the church office building and there's another building that's right about that same height.
Wells Fargo?
Wells Fargo building are around in the 420 range, somewhere around there.
And those are about the highest buildings right now. And going back to this slide, this is something I went over a little bit too quickly. But you can see right here where it doesn't exactly fit in with this concept of keeping that sloping pyramid coming down. So if this area were 190 feet, as outlined with the red line, if you're moving towards the downtown area, you got 375 feet is the D1 maximum height, but you can get additional height going through design review process there. The highest buildings that we've got right now are right around 420 feet. But as you move towards this area, then you move into another zone where the maximum heights are only 120 feet, as would be the rest of the GMU zone. And then the D3 zone is only 90 feet. So you could have a differential there between the D3 zone, which surrounds Pioneer Park down in that area, where the maximum buildings would be only 90 feet, whereas in this area, they would jump up another 100 feet. So they would be effectively twice as tall as what would be allowed there.
Any other questions? Would you step back or have the applicant, can we have the applicant come up, please?
Sorry, just one sec. I'm getting this ready for the applicant.
Okay, no problem. They're not even up here yet. Please state your name for the record, and you'll have 10 minutes to make a presentation.
Doug. Sorry.
So I'm Doug Tim, Architectural Nexus.
Andrew Bybee with Stack Real Estate.
And Nathan Ricks with Stack Real Estate.
So this is Great district. We've been following this for, boy, it seems like over 20 years, and that's probably because it has been over 20 years. It's a place where something incredible can happen, and we're quite excited to be a part of it. We understand that we're asking for more height and that there can be findings made in the guiding documents which support the idea that it should not be allowed. We also think that looking at it through a different lens, that each one of those points could be looked at as being supportive. This is a place that wants to develop from an urban standpoint into a walking environment that appreciates the TOD nature of the land and appreciates a lot of the history that's gone on, but also looks forward. Nathan, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your time tonight, by the way. We're excited about this area. We've been working on this for a number of years, and we have worked out a land lease with the family, the Nicholas Food Company family, that had 3¼ acres on the northwest corner of this block, immediately across the street from the Front Runner and Tracks intermodal hub area. So it's been of interest to us. We've done more TOD developments in the state of Utah than any other developer, from South Jordan, Sandy, Lehigh, Clearfield we're starting to work on, and this site in downtown Salt Lake City. We're big believers in the future of rail in our very linear geography we have stretched across the Wasatch Front. And we believe that we can't build I-15 big enough to accommodate all the cars that will eventually try to get on it. And we think rail is going to become more and more important in the future. And certainly the black eye we take in Utah many times is our air quality that we have in the middle of the winter that is really at bad proportions, and we need to get more cars off the road. This is one reason that we really are focused on this site. You know, we love Festival Street. We love the plans to narrow that street and make it walkable. We would hope that many people would arrive on rail to this location, wouldn't need to bring their car to this location, that we can be green, we can be sustainable. And that's why we're focused on making really serious investments in these TOD areas. We think it's the future. So the supporting documents that were just referenced show buildings could be 6 to 12 stories in relationship to this area. We're asking for 12 stories. We're believing that we can attract the right kinds of tenants if we have enough density around this area. And while we respectfully disagree with the findings, we think if there's any place that we should maximize density, it's at the TOD site. And that's what every TOD planning document will tell you, is that it needs to have both residential and office. And office has become a really key component because it's a standard place that people go daily because they have a job. They work in those buildings. And so that can reduce vehicle trips because it's so consistent. When you add the residential mix into it, which we've planned, we didn't bring our entire block plan, but we've spoken to the RDA about it. We've got a great mix of really nice residential brownstones that are in there that are, you know, townhome type walk-ups on some of these interior streets to make them more human scale. And we have Pocket Park in the middle. It's really all the things that are kind of designated in the guiding documents. And so we're you know, a little surprised. We're disappointed that a negative recommendation would be proposed, but we would hope that you would look at it maybe with a little bit of our lens of what we're seeing and what we're building, and choose to be, you know, more dense in this area. I just note in closing that, you know, a lot of the new projects that are being proposed for the CBD are 25 stories. So in general, the downtown core is getting taller anyway. So you still are going to maintain that kind of pyramidal line up to the peak in the CBD as time goes on. It's inevitable with land prices going up, the buildings are going to get taller in the CBD. And we think this is a very appropriate height, especially for a TOD location. So we would hope for a positive recommendation.
So in terms of additional height, we still feel it's important to recognize downtown and the 375-foot plus height limit that is established for that. We think that having this district have a height which honors that is important. We have looked at view sheds. We don't feel that they're negatively compromised, especially if you look at the 120-foot that's now allowed for building height within the GMU zone. We think that the urban character with streets and the ratio of height and that sort of thing is important, but we also look at some wonderful cities where there are narrower streets, like Philadelphia, where you have 300 and 400-foot high buildings, but they're wonderful streets, and it's because of the character that's created at the ground floor and what happens at the street plane and that sort of thing. We think the narrowing of streets is a great idea. I know you can walk through downtown areas and you can hear a conversation across the street, not understand what people are saying, but know that there are other people there, and that's very urban. But we're trying to create a place where people can work, where people can live, that's walkable, that works with the TOD nature of the district, and actually causes an emphasis and momentum to developing an area that I know the RDA has sought long to redevelop. We've had meetings over the years and recently regarding this very petition with the RDA, and we feel like that having something act as a catalyst to make it happen is very important to us. We understand, regardless of the recommendation of the Planning Commission, that it does go to City Council, and we respect that. But at the same time, we wanted you to understand our points, and we're ready to work with planning staff, with the Planning Commission, with the RDA, and with the City Council on doing the right thing to bring this catalyst forward.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
I do. Can you walk me through or talk to me why you think you need 190 feet over 120?
Thank you. Yeah, one of the reasons are that economics, come into play. If we can only do a shorter building, we cannot pay the land lease that we have with the Nicholas family, for the next 99 years. So part of it's economics for sure, but part of it is really the big driver for me personally is just that we've got multiple billions of dollars that have been spent by UTA to create this system that can help us reduce air pollution, move people, do it in a sustainable, green way. Why wouldn't we maximize that? Why wouldn't we, in all due respect to guiding documents from 2014, we're almost 2020 and things have changed a lot, even in that time. And people have become aware of TODs and what they can and should be. And great cities are making really amazing use of it. In our opinion, with the linear nature of our geography, with mountains on one side and lake on the other side, we're strung out on this little strip of buildable land. We can't just keep sprawling. We're just compounding our problems. So to me, the overriding thing is why wouldn't we maximize density around these stations where people can easily walk to them and we can help to start to mitigate some of these problems. So
I add just one or two things to that. Those are great points. The other thing is in development or in construction, the building code's kind of set up to sort of package people in mid-rise and high-rise, and that mid-rise code is the most efficient code to build outside of a downtown. And so that's why you see in suburban markets a lot of 5- and 6-story office buildings. You don't see much above 5- and 6-story because you hit a new code and it's really expensive to do. At 120 feet, you could get to an 8-story building. But if you're going to go above 6 stories and only get 2 more floors on top of it, the efficiencies of what you have to do just to get into that high-rise code, it just doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to go above 6, you usually you try to shoot above 10, you get to 10 to 12 to 14, and then you can start to make the efficiencies of a high-rise code make sense. So that's kind of a nuts and bolts construction. Then the other thing is you know, we know our market really well. We've done a lot of office development, and we know what tenants are asking for and what they want in Class A office space. And it's pretty specific. You know, we've done a lot of building in the suburban market, and we know what the tech tenants want. We've been in touch with Salt Lake, with the RDA and with the city here, and wanting to attract tech downtown. You know, I think you probably saw the article by Silicon Slopes, or Clint Betts in Silicon Slopes, that made the comment of downtown Salt Lake eventually becoming the hub of tech of Silicon Slopes, not the south end of the valley or North Utah County, but Salt Lake County, or excuse me, Salt Lake City. There's specific things inside of that office product that these tech tenants want, and it's not all office space is created equal. There's floor plate size, there's heights and views, there's connection to rail, millennial mixed use living in it, and we can combine in this west side. We can combine all of that in one. We can create the perfect package that will sort of create that Soho, if you will, of New York here. A little edgier, a little more tech-focused, centered on millennials coming and living and working. And we need to get high enough to both maximize density, but also get high enough to make it feel iconic. The tenant that we had been focused on for the better part of 6 months for this particular site has since gone a different direction because of timing of how much of the entitlement time that we need to do here, which is fine. But the message that they sent was really clear, is that if I'm going to come in and invest on the west side of Salt Lake, where what I see today is not worth investing in, this is coming from the CEO, but if you can create that vision and build something iconic that when someone comes across 4 South, there's something there besides a 5 or 6 story suburban office building, then that's a place I want to come and put my roots down, and I want to come and invest in that area and help catalyze it. So that speaks to the market, the tenant saying, I want something iconic, not something that's going to outdo downtown, but something that's going to be special for that part of the neighborhood.
Thank you. I think you've, is there any other specific questions for the applicant?
So, well, I mean, one of the things I'm grappling with is when we're doing a zone change, we're looking at we're not really considering a project, right? We're considering whether or not the zone change and the request is appropriate for the area that you're making. And then for us, we review and we look at the standards that are set out for us, because we did not set the master plan, this body didn't, and we have comments on approved it. But we're looking at the guiding documents of what's been kind of directed to us and trying to figure out whether or not the proposal matches those guiding documents or not. Like, it's not a question of whether or not we think a project's good or not, appropriate or not, it's whether or not it matches what the direction that we've been given as a body. And the staff does make a pretty strong argument, you know, going through those, you know, sections of standards towards the rear of the report that outlines where you guys don't comply with the direction that we've been given, which doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room. But you made a comment in your presentation where you felt that there were other ways to read the standards and what's been outlined in the guiding documents that maybe would be more appropriate, that would make an argument for this zone change. I have not heard yet in your presentation what those arguments are or how they relate to those guiding documents and where the staff has correctly or incorrectly read those guiding documents, or what your interpretation of is those and how those relate to your proposal. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that and give me some context or your perspective on why the staff's recommendation is not, as it applies those guiding documents and the standards, does not apply.
And if I can add to that, as you discuss this, will you please refrain from giving the same arguments you've already given, so that we can move into new territory here? Thank you.
I'm very interested in specific sections of either the code or the staff report, not the broad vision for the project.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think that the first slide or two that the staff put up, and maybe if we can put it back up there, we could look at it. I think that is probably the code sections. I can't recite them for you, but yeah, if you could maybe throw that back up there. TOD was specifically mentioned. I've elaborated on that, so I won't elaborate anymore on that as Brenda's direction. So that's one. Number two would be the 6 to 12-story height that was in the upper, right there on that slide on the screen. Complementary buildings, 6 to 12 stories in height. That's all we're asking for. We've actually, on this full block design, had 6-story residential mid-block with the 12-story building on the northwest corner. So corners framed by higher buildings, lower in the middle to give a relief to the height of that. And I think those are two things that are specifically in the guiding documents that would support, our plan supports those things.
Thank you.
So with respect to additional height, we feel the guiding documents are telling us that, in some places anyways, that this district is the gateway into Salt Lake, and it's essentially the beginning of downtown. There are other areas in that reference the RDA property and the district in general as an area that is a catalyst. We feel that this is being a gateway and into the city and being the beginning of downtown, that actually rising up and saying that this is downtown is something that is pretty forcefully outlined by the guiding documents. With respect to appreciating the ratios of height and that sort of thing was another issue that was brought up in the report. And I know you said that you don't want us to rehash things, but we do think that the proper scale of buildings and that sort of thing can be attended to, and that the intent of those guiding documents can be maintained.
So I have a question, which is, would you, how much of this particular area that is proposed for rezoning is property that you own or will own or control?
Bring up that red line. Right there, yeah, thank you very much. On the left side, 300 South, which will be Festival Street, is right in the middle of the red box. So everything that is south of that or below that 300 South line, that corner. Yeah. So we have 3 1/4 acres on that corner. So it actually go, yeah, right there. So it's the prominent piece right across from the rail stop. And that's probably another reason, people arrive on the train, and more people will do that in the future. Do we want to have a nice, beautiful, building that says you are in downtown?
And is that a remainder of that controlled by other people or by the RDA?
RDA has most of the block.
There's 1.9 acres next to it, controlled by
And the
somebody else.
RDA has, maybe
4
this
acres.
is a question for the staff as well, conceded to this particular issue as the property owner, as a property owner in that area?
I think about 4 acres is RDA. There's
Okay.
the corner across from the Rio Grande is owned by the state of Utah.
So you're making an argument that the zone, should be, that this particular part of the zone should be changed. Why not the whole zone? If the argument is, hey, we're a city, let's start acting like one.
Yeah, well, a big part of it has to do with thinking about the urban character here that's trying to be created and trying to be recognized. And a big part of that is establishing this very special place, this Festival Street, and creating this district as a gateway to the city, and then recognizing the need to use some urban cues to create sort of an iconic form there, and to have enough, let's say, energy in terms of building height and intensity of use that would allow, let's say, the right type of tenancy to come in, an entity who would come in who would be able to actually occupy a space that becomes this iconic element that starts to become and announce a gateway to the city.
Great. Thank you. Are there any more questions for the applicant? You may step back, and we're going to open the public hearing. Is there anyone here from the Community Council who wishes to speak? Representing the Community Council. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this topic? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask Christopher to return to the desk. And Look for discussion from the Planning Commission.
I guess for me, the height itself is not the issue so much as I think that neighborhood really does have the potential to become a second destination, like a second major draw, especially with its proximity to the rail station and to the gateway. I think that whole neighborhood could become something that is quite unique within the city and a place that not just the people that work in that tech firm that's going to go there will use. And I want to do whatever would support that. But my question for Chris would be, are there things in the zone that require, for instance, active public uses on the ground floor or mixed use with not just office, but office and residential and retail and restaurant? Is there anything like that in the zone or?
Yeah, that is one thing that I referenced in a certain part of my staff report where the GMU zone allows for a variety of different uses, but it doesn't necessarily establish there has to be certain percentages of those uses or that type of thing. So, that opens up the floodgates to potentially having big structures that are only one use.
That's my concern.
Maybe it's an entire office building or something like that. And that's just beyond our control at this point, but that is what the baseline zoning is.
I guess, I don't know if there's a precedent for this, but is there a way to say, okay, this is the maximum height, and above that you could go above that if you include things such as active public uses and pocket parks and whatever else? Is there a precedent for that within our zone, our city, anywhere?
Yeah, there is a precedent for that. Yeah, I was just looking through the GMU. I mean, that's something that we would have to probably go back to the drawing board a little bit and look at, but we do have zones that say if you go a certain height, or if you include residential, then you can
increase.
You can get extra things. One thing that's with this particular proposal, there's really any absence of design review for those taller buildings on the corner. Right now in the GMU, if you were to go over 75 feet if you're a flat roofed building, or over 90 feet if you have a pitched on your building, up to 125, you have to go through design review. The applicant's proposal for those corner buildings eliminates the design review process. The design review process does have a lot more elements in that process, in those standards that require us to review ground floor interaction and things like that. The GMU district does have some design standards built into it that require some ground floor, at least activation from a design standpoint.
Thanks. I guess just to summarize, my concern is not that the increased height would be appropriate or inappropriate. I don't necessarily think it's inappropriate, but I am concerned that there would be a 12-story office building with a secured lobby that I, as just a regular person, could not enter, and then there's nothing for me in that district to go to. And I think that creates a really dead environment. It creates something, akin to a lot of our suburban office areas where really, if you don't have an appointment there, you don't go there. That's what I do not want to see with this neighborhood. So I hope that we could come up with something creative where if we do allow increased height, we require things like that.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that I considered and I alluded to in the staff report. But that's just something that's there right now. It'd require a bigger push and go a different direction to do that.
Yeah, I also agree with that. I didn't really hear anything about the community engagement on the ground level, and I think that the whole purpose of this area is to have that street, which is for the community, and I think that would have to be a big part of these projects moving forward to kind of create that engagement and have that be a specific element on that level.
There is some built-in design standards in the GMU that require, that speak to architectural character and materials, speaks to windows and building fenestration, entrance and visual access. So there is some stuff built into the GMU already that relate to those design
Well, I think it has to be more than aesthetic.
Yeah.
I think it has to be something that draws people there and not just a lobby. And I think there should be some sort of design review that would happen if this was allowed. Because I'm all for density. I want taller buildings. I want to reduce the commutes. But I think it has to be done in a respectful way to the community and create that engagement.
Yeah, I don't think glazing percentages is enough in this case, because you get a parking garage with windows on it, which is absolutely not what we want. I think it needs to be more what the actual use is.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think it's essential, for me, it's, I think, an idea of what the character of this part of the city. That it's not, that there are parts of the city where it's not only welcome, it's like come one, come all for great height, and really want that. But we don't want I don't think we want a city where, you know, it's a level 375 or 400 feet, even though we all want density. I think we do have to consider that there are parts of the city whose character now and in the past, and evident by the Rio Grande building itself, is more of a smaller scale. And I think that was exactly what the intention of that particular zoning area, and certainly the RDA's master plan around the Festival Street was that intention.
Yeah, I would just say that I'm sympathetic to the extra height too. I'm kind of wondering, timeline-wise, was the zoning around this done before or after the conception of the intermodal hub? Do we know that? Like, was this part of that understanding that this hub would be there? And
Yeah, the zoning was completed, yes, just 2 years ago in
Okay.
2017. This has been in the plans for much longer than that.
and the whole area, the whole
Plan, the station area master plan.
the whole GMU area was planned with that. Okay, so the whole area was. I think the moment we decided to put the intermodal hub in that area, it was the moment we decided we should really look into increasing the density in that whole area drastically. And I don't know, and I'm also sympathetic to the pyramidal, look of the city and all that stuff, but I think that decision was changed with the decision to put the intermodal hub there. And I think that, while I'm sympathetic to the cause tonight, I do think we maybe need a more comprehensive discussion about what more we need to do to that area to better play off of the intermodal hub.
Yeah, as a planner, I appreciate these issues, and I think that height very well may be appropriate, but what it comes down to is the standards of review. And just looking at the guiding documents and what we have out there, it seemed like it was very difficult to be able to get to that place where they're meeting the review standards. And so that's, it's kind of a bigger conversation at this point, is kind of what it comes down to for me, because they made a very specific petition. The other thing that was a little bit difficult to even gauge at all is they did not submit any sort of plan. So it's just kind of conceptual across the entire area. We're not seeing buildings. We're not seeing what they're planning on doing there. So based on that, and based on the guiding documents, based on what our standards of review are, I feel like that we reviewed it the best way that we could, and we determined what we could within the standards that we have to work within.
Madam Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Go right ahead.
So first, I'm very sympathetic to the applicant and what they're trying to do there. I also understand some of the challenges that come with tech and recruiting some of the companies, and that we may need to look at the gateway and look at how we zone that. I don't think tonight is that discussion. I think that's a much broader community engagement piece. We've got what I think is pretty recent for us in the last 5 years, some guiding documents that are pretty clear. And maybe the city council could look at those and review them, or go through the process in the future for how we change and maybe address some of the changes in the economy to recruit companies that we need to do. But tonight's unfortunately not that place. And so with this applicant, I move that based on the findings in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received in the public hearing, I move the planning commission forward a negative recommendation consistent with, do you have this right? Yeah, negative recommendation to the city council regarding the zoning text amendment for the increased height limits for the portion of the GMU zone, PLN PCM 2019-00639.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Matt and a second from Maureen for a negative vote. And I'm going to go, and remember, this is a negative vote, so voting yes means no. Okay.
We have discussion on that
Yes.
motion.
Yes.
I agree that I don't think that as written, I'm comfortable forwarding a positive recommendation. A question I wanted to ask was the design review process currently in place that allows up to 120 feet instead of 75 or 90 feet. Does that include things that we've been discussing tonight, such as what the uses are and
Not uses,
it's just aesthetics?
aesthetic.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion? John? No? We'll move to a vote. John?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Amy?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. We will be forwarding a negative recommendation. Remember that for those of you in the audience, the Planning Commission does not make the zoning changes, that we make a recommendation to City Council. Our next item on the agenda sounds like a good one. Medicinal cannabis text amendment. And Lex Trauber.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. This is a request to amend the Salt Lake City zoning ordinance in matters that are related to land use and cannabis that are now legal under the Utah State Code. And the purpose of these amendments is to update our zoning ordinance, our city zoning ordinance, to provide consistency with state law concerning the regulation of medicinal cannabis that was passed by the Utah State Legislature in 2019. And that was in the form of the Utah Medicinal Cannabis Act, and that bill provided for the cultivation, processing, medical recommendation, and patient use of medicinal cannabis. So the state mandated that municipalities adopt regulations to incorporate the new laws concerning medicinal cannabis into local zoning ordinances by January of 2021. The state has also mandated that if a municipality has an agricultural or manufacturing land use, that cannabis production establishments must be allowed in one of those districts. They also mandated that medicinal cannabis pharmacies be allowed in all zoning districts with the exception of those districts that are primarily residential, subject to specific distancing requirements. Further, state law dictates that municipalities may not adopt regulations that are more restrictive than the state regulations. So in order to address this, we have come up with a proposal to amend our ordinance, and there are basically three key points there. The first is to define cannabis production establishment and medicinal cannabis pharmacy, and those have been proposed or included in your packet, and those are based directly on the state definition. Second, we have provided for a cannabis production establishment as a permitted use in the manufacturing and agricultural zones, as well as the business park zoning districts. And those are included in the land use tables, and those are also in your packet. And third, we've included a new section, 21A36-310, which will be general provisions for medicinal cannabis pharmacy establishments, and that will indicate regulations for where those types of uses can be located in our city. This is really kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? A housekeeping type item. Basically, we are trying to reflect what the state has adopted as law into our ordinance so that when we, as planners, citizens, commissions, are approached with folks who want to participate in these types of activities, it's clear where these activities can be conducted in our city. So with that, we recommend that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council regarding the amendments concerning the medicinal cannabis as proposed. The City Council has final decision-making authority in the proposed text amendments. Any questions?
Any questions? You may step down and we will hold a public hearing. So is there anyone here who would like to speak concerning this particular agenda item? Wow, this isn't as much fun as I thought it would be. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Are there any other comments or questions or discussion from the Planning Commission? I will entertain a motion. Nobody wants to be the one, huh?
I'll do it. Based on the analysis and findings listed in the staff report, testimony, and the proposal presented, I move that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation regarding the amendments on to the City Council as proposed. The Planning Commission finds that the proposed amendments comply with the review standards as demonstrated in Attachment C of the staff report.
Second.
It has been moved by Amy and seconded by John. Is there any further discussion? Matt?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Maureen?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is the Business Park 1 Overlay Zone Map and Text Amendment. So, we have a staff member.
I don't see our staff member here right now. Daniel, you're probably watching this, so please come down.
We moved a little too quickly for
Yeah,
Daniel.
gosh. We will take a water break until the staff member shows up. Thank you. Water break. There's cookies too. Cookies too? Yeah, there's cookies too.
Thought you'd take a little bit more time. Oh, good. Okay. Let me see if I can just preload it.
PowerPoint too. This is just a PDF file.
Oh, okay.
that gonna mess you up?
No, either one should work.
So go to the G. And go to the SWAN or Planning Commission. That would. That's it right there.
Okay, you guys are good using that? Or
Huh?
You guys are good to use the PDF for your
That should work,
presentation?
shouldn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
Does it blow up?
Yeah.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Nice to see you.
Are you using the PDF as the
PDF's fine.
Okay.
I don't know how.
So-
Will I click it?
Yeah, I'll load it up when you guys are up there and,
Okay.
and go through it.
It's not PowerPoint. So.
It's not the PowerPoint.
I can load the PowerPoint too if you want. Either way.
Yeah, let's do the PowerPoint. Go ahead.
So, I'm gonna be up here first.
Then you invite us up.
And then, yeah.
Okay.
You guys up.
Perfect. Yeah, it's this thing.
Okay.
Before you start, did you get my
Yes,
comments?
yes, I passed it on to the planning commission, so
Oh,
they
thank
have
you
it in
so-
their packets.
thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. We're back to order. Okay, we are going to hear from Daniel regarding this proposal.
So thank you. This is a private petition by Ivory Development. The request is to add a Business Park I zoning overlay section to city code, and then they're requesting to map that zoning overlay across the property at 2691 North, 2200 West. So just to give you some context of the property we're looking at, you can see it in the wider context map on the left side of this slide. The property is highlighted in yellow. It's located to the north of the airport, just west of I-215 at the very north edge of the city boundary. On the right, you see a closer up view that identifies land uses around the property. The property is adjacent on the west to Rudy Reclamation and Sportsman's Club, Duck Club that manages a number of acres of wetlands. On the east side of the property, you have agricultural and residential uses predominantly. And then 3200 West itself, for context, is a gravel road, and 2200 West is a two-lane rural or local road. And for size, the property is about 400 acres, and the frontage of the property itself along 2200 West is about 2/3 of a mile. So this is the current city zoning map. You can see the property is currently zoned business park, so it could be currently developed for a variety of commercial and light industrial uses. The surrounding properties to the north, the west, and the east are predominantly agricultural. Under city code, they're zoned AG2 and AG5, and in the county properties that also surround the property, they're also under the county's agricultural designation. To the south of the property, you have additional BP zoned land, and then in the county, there's a small sliver of M1 or their light industrial zone under county regulations. To the southwest of the site, you can see the airport property, the zoning airport just is on the corner there. So for historical background, the property has been zoned since 1976 for commercial uses. The commercial designation was C3. It allowed for a variety of commercial and light industrial uses. In 1995, the zoning changed to the business park zone, which generally reflects its current zoning. In 2000, the city did a North Point small area plan or master plan for this particular area. It included a number of policies generally related to buffering and reducing impacts on residents that live in that area. So following that plan adoption, the City Council also adopted some zoning changes, including a landscape buffer into the BP zone that would apply on 2200 West across from residences. So as far as the proposal background itself, they originally requested a rezone for the property in 2018 of October to the M1 light industrial zone. The applicant went to a number of community council meetings. We had an open house held by the city. And then in July of 2019, the applicant revised their proposal to the current proposal of Business Park 1 overlay. And the overlay proposal since that time has been developed into the current ordinance in your packet, and that's been in response to additional public and city input. So again, the current zoning of the property is business park. The business park zone again allows for a variety of commercial and light industrial uses. It allows for buildings up to 60 feet in height. It includes a 100-foot building setback from 2200 West, and that was part of the North Point small area plan. That buffer includes a 50-foot landscaping buffer, a 5-foot berm, trees every 25 feet, 4-foot tall shrub line, and a 6-foot tall fence. It also includes a 15% open space requirement, so any lot has to reserve 15% of the area for just open space, which is landscaped without any structures. So the applicant's proposal is an overlay, and an overlay supplements the existing underlying zoning. It doesn't replace the underlying zoning. It can modify the underlying zoning when it differs. The proposal from the applicant would add some additional commercial and light industrial uses to be allowed. It increases the height limit for development by 5 feet to 65 feet. It increases the residential landscape buffer along 2200 West by 10 feet to a total of 60 feet of width. It also allows for the allocation of that open space requirement to be allocated anywhere on the entire development site rather than piecemeal lot by lot. It additionally prohibits driveways along 2200 West, though public streets would still be allowed to connect to 2200 West. So individual businesses couldn't have individual driveways onto 2200 West. It also imposes a variety of environmental regulations. Most of these are from the Northwest Quadrant zoning that the city recently adopted in the past few years. They're predominantly regarding protections for birds and wildlife, includes restrictions on lighting, restrictions on glass, light-colored roofing, which is generally related to energy efficiency. They've also added a prohibition for development within 50 feet of the canal, as there is a canal that runs through this property. And they've also proposed that any wetland mitigation that's required for development of the site be located on the west side of the property adjacent to the existing wetlands. And I'll get into these a little bit more in the next few slides. So as far as what staff looks at generally with a zoning amendment, we generally look predominantly at the master plan for guidance. In this case, there's a specific master plan for this area titled the North Point Small Area Plan. And again, this was developed generally in response to resident concerns for future development in 2000. It established a future land use map for the area that designated this property and properties to the south as future business park development properties. It also establishes a future land use expectation of agricultural on the east side of 2200 West. As part of that proposal, it also included a buffering standard that I've spoken about in the last few slides that requires that 100-foot setback from 2200 West, the berm, the landscaping. As part of that plan, it also proposed a new arterial street that would divert traffic from 2200 West into the site away from the residential properties on 2200. It also included a policy that the city should restrict access to the site directly from 2200 West. Again, with the expectation that traffic would go into the property through the proposed arterial, and that proposed arterial is shown in the blue line through the middle of the property. As far as what the city council then did adopt into the actual regulations, they did adopt the buffering standard for 2200 West for the landscaping and the berm, and they also adopted that proposed arterial in the city's official street master plan. But they did not adopt restrictions on direct access from 2200 West. So as far as the proposal itself, the proposal proposes to increase the allowed uses for the property. These uses are generally similar in intensity to the existing BP allowed uses. It does make some of the conditional uses permitted. Generally, because of the buffering standards already in this zone, staff isn't as concerned with the change from conditional uses to being permitted uses. Generally, when we look at a conditional use, oftentimes the requirements are just additional buffering, setbacks, berms, things like that. Additionally, the increased uses fit generally within the business park designation that the master plan calls for. The applicant has also requested the increased height. The 5 feet is fairly minimal. It's in line with our other similar commercial zones, so staff didn't have significant concerns with that. The open space allowance that they're requesting would allow for the open space to be distributed across the entire development site rather than lot by lot. And generally, they could consolidate that into a more substantial open space area that may be more environmentally meaningful. So staff is supportive of that allowance. This proposal also addresses residential buffering and traffic. It increases the landscape buffer from the 50 feet that's currently in code to 60 feet. This meets or exceeds the master plan buffering guidance, so staff is supportive of that. It also includes the driveway prohibition from 2200 West, and that would reduce vehicle conflict points and cross traffic turns across 2200 West into the site. If by limiting it to a public street, public streets are generally more expensive to build than just a simple driveway. It includes utility improvements as well. So staff would expect fewer connections to 2200 West and fewer conflict points. Though it doesn't fully meet the master plan guidance that the policy that says no vehicles should access the site from 2200, it does better meet the master plan guidance. The proposal also adds language requiring the new north-south arterial street. It would be required for any development, whether they're subdividing the property or just going through a building permit process. Again, it better assures that that street is constructed in the long term and better meets the master plan guidance. And just one note about any development, regardless of this overlay, 2200 West with any development activity would need to be widened and improved by the developer as the property is divided. Additionally, the transportation department has noted that they would require a traffic study for any subdividing of this property into individual lots. And through that traffic study, we could identify the need for additional off-site improvements, such as additional paving down the street from the property if the roadway couldn't handle the capacity. So as far as environmental context of this site, it is directly adjacent to wetlands on the west. The wetlands are actively managed by the Rudy Reclamation and Duck and Hunting Club. They are officially designated as a migratory bird production area. They've registered themselves with the county under that designation, which states that they do actively manage the property, which means they actively manage the wetlands on that property. There also is a wildlife concentration that's been identified on the property of birds. That wildlife concentration is just to the west of 3200 West. And one important thing to note is that this property is closer to wetlands than nearly any other property in the city, including properties in the northwest quadrant. So in response to that context, the developer is including some environmental regulations from the northwest quadrant. Those include the lighting restrictions so that there's not light trespass into other properties, window treatments to reduce bird impacts to buildings, requirements for roof color to a lighter color for energy efficiency reasons. They've also included a allowance to replace any city-required trees with shrubs. That's been in response to environmental concerns that trees can provide habitat for predatory birds that would negatively impact the wetland wildlife. And there's also a requirement for fencing to prevent trespass into wetland areas. Additionally, they are including the setback from canals on the site. The 50-foot setback that they're proposing matches expectations elsewhere in the city when we have creeks or canals. We have that codified in other zoning. It would also require any wetland mitigation to be located along the west side of the property. So wetland mitigation would be if there's any wetlands identified on their development site and they wanted to move those wetlands. In order to accommodate development in those areas, they would have to move those wetlands to the west side of the property where it would serve as a buffer for the wetlands located west of 3200 West. Staff thinks that would be great, but we don't have any data about what that expected mitigation would look like or how substantial it would be. Because of that, we are recommending an additional vertical noise and light buffer for wetland wildlife protection that would mirror some of the requirements for the east side buffer. It would include a 5-foot berm and 6-foot tall wall. And again, that was in response to best planning practices to buffer uses and better meet the city's general environmental policies about protecting wildlife. So overall, staff believes this is an improvement over the existing development allowances in the BP zone, but we do recommend that some conditions be added to a recommendation of approval to the City Council. The first one has to do with flexibility in finalizing any specific language to ensure that the language is enforceable. It also involves clarifying the residential buffering location language to ensure that the buffer, the increased buffer they're proposing along 2200 West actually applies where it should apply. It's kind of a technical language. Also, the tree allowance that they're requesting through this proposal to replace any city-required tree requirements for shrubs and trees, shrubs and grasses. Generally supportive of that, but the tree requirement on the east side of the property is an important component of the residential buffering. So we propose that it wouldn't apply to the east side of the property near the residences. Additionally, the berm and wall buffer that was noted in the last slide is a condition, and adding a plat tracking requirement for the open space designation, just so that staff in the long term can look at property records, look at plat records, and identify where they've actually allocated their open space on the site. So with that, I can take any questions.
I have some questions, Daniel. I think I need you to go back and help me understand better the language. So what you said in your staff report about the arterial street was that there was too many people in play, that you couldn't expect it. But what you said tonight was a little different, but then you moved on quickly. So what is proposed that would work towards making sure this arterial street happens?
So they've added language that adds an additional guarantee that the road will happen through their property, and they only control their property, so we can require them on their property to dedicate right-of-way for that street and make the improvements for that street.
Is that currently part of their overlay language?
Yes,
okay.
It is. Yes, and it also would be required anyway when they subdivide property with existing regulations.
What do they control in this area that is the subject property if they don't control all of it?
So they control the property highlighted in yellow, which
so
let's
that's
see if I can.
Pretty much where the arterial road seems to be
Yes,
located.
so I don't know if you can see the cursor. Whoops.
So technically then, that arterial road would be accomplished via this overlay.
through the portion that goes through their property. So where the
Seems
mouse
like
keeps
most of it.
disappearing, but
Right there. is
right,
where it
right to
doesn't.
this point, yes. If the properties below it ever developed, we'd have to work through how that gets configured.
And that other arterial road that is running just below it, parallel to 3200 West, go up.
I don't know why it keeps moving.
The proposed arterial is that road, if you're curving along and then all of a sudden you get a parallel road directly to 3200 West that comes out on 2100 North, is that an existing road?
Is that the 3300, the yellow line?
No. What are you doing, Daniel?
I don't know. Okay.
Okay, so if you're looking on the proposed arterial road and it's curving, there's a section that juts down and then is running parallel to 3200.
Oh, okay. That portion was not adopted into the city's major street plan, so it would not apply. That was proposed in 2000, but it didn't end up getting adopted into the city's actual street plans. So the only portion that got adopted was the curving line.
Okay, so they would be able to build their proposed arterial, but not actually to the point you would access it via 2200 West.
Right. Through the subdivision process, we would have to make some determination about a connecting road from 2200 West through in their property segment, because we don't know whether those southern properties would develop.
Okay. I still think, I think it's very important when we have opportunities, even if it's not the whole road, that we ensure we have a placeholder for that, because we won't get a second chance, even regardless of multiple property owners. Because at some point, that is going to happen, and we need that in place.
Yep.
The other question I have is regarding the open space requirement. So if we're talking about all of the parts that they control, do you calculate how many lots that is and times that 15% by that, so we still get the same amount of open space? They just are consolidating it somewhere, but we're not losing technically any percentage of that.
Right. It would still be 15%. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
That open space is still privately owned. It would not be publicly dedicated.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
I'm going to ask the same question that someone asked earlier, which is it possible to require that public space be, that open space be dedicated to public?
We don't have anything in the code right now.
Yeah.
I think some municipalities have required that.
Yes.
I don't know if that becomes a problem.
Maybe we don't even want it, I don't know.
First of all, there would need to be a plan that identified that.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, if we were to go down that road, we would have to get involved in one of these tricky analyses that come from U.S. Supreme Court case law on whether there's a nexus and proportionality on requiring dedication of open space. So that's really not something that I'm prepared to.
It's not something we can do now, but it's possible to do as long as we follow the guidelines of the Supreme Court.
The current BP zoning district requires this 15% open space.
Right.
That it's, generally it does remain private. So that is in the existing code also.
But, that sort of open space, I'm just, for now, just more discussion than this particular proposal. But that sort of open space, if consolidated, could actually, if it's not consolidated, it's going to be like little islands in the parking lot, and pretty useless. So if we're able to, insist that it's consolidated or something like that, and that it be dedicated if we want it, that would be something to look forward to in future planning efforts, perhaps.
Even if it's not dedicated to the city, is there any restrictions as to what that open space is or how it functions?
In the current code, it's just that it's landscaped.
Just
that
landscape
doesn't
space
have
at all.
structures
Okay.
on it. Yeah.
Grass.
With a commercial parking lot there, could it be developed into like a private commercial airport parking lot, or no?
the commercial parking allowance. It could potentially be used.
Going to a permitted use, you could put another.
Yes.
commercial.
Is there any other questions? Thank you. Is the applicant here? Would you like to come forward? You'll have 10 minutes. Please state your names for the record.
Hi, I'm Scott Bates here on behalf of the Ivory Foundation.
And Wade Budge, also representing the Ivory Foundation.
Brian Prince with Ivory Development.
And then Ashley Hadfield representing the Ivory Foundation.
We'd like to start by thanking all of you for hearing our application tonight, and we'd also like to recognize all of the other stakeholders in the room who we've worked with for the past year plus, and thank them for their cooperation to get us to where we are tonight. I want to introduce you to the Ivory Foundation and clarify one thing. Since this application was made, the control of the 440-acre site has been transferred from Ivory Development to the Ivory Foundation. And the reason for that is the Clark and Christine Ivory Foundation has decided to donate a portion of this property to the Board of Regents for the benefit of the institutions of higher learning throughout the state of Utah. And with the idea that the profits from the development of this site will fund scholarships in perpetuity. So with that, I'd like to just introduce the foundation and explain to you a little bit more why this business park overlay will help accomplish a mission that we've established over the past few months, working with the stakeholders and talking with people at the University of Utah and the Board of Regents and all the other stakeholders in the room. One of the big goals, there's three big goals of the Ivory Foundation. Those are education, providing affordable housing, and supplying other basic needs to those most in need so that they can advance economically. The big goal for education, currently the foundation supports hundreds of students a year with scholarships. The goal is to support thousands of students per year with scholarships. So, yeah, please go ahead. So the big goal for Utah education is fourfold. It's to improve access to higher ed, curb the cost of tuition, elevate completion rates, and build a more skilled workforce. To do that, you obviously need revenue. There's several ways to raise revenue for education. The one that the Ivory Foundation is particularly skilled at doing is real estate revenues, creating ongoing real estate revenues from real estate development. So, over these past few months, the foundation decided to approach the University of Utah and the Board of Regents with an idea to develop this 440-acre site and extend research park type uses from the university down to this site that's approximately located to the airport and a key location left in Salt Lake City for this kind of development. As we've done that, Ivory Development decided an M1 probably wasn't in the best interest of all the stakeholders we received comments from, and that this BP overlay would most accomplish the integration of research park uses from the university current location to this new location. So that's really the purpose behind this Business Park 1 overlay application. So it would be a collaboration between the Ivory Foundation and the key institutions of higher learning in the state, most notably probably the University of Utah, Utah State University, and Salt Lake Community College. The vision would be for the University of Utah and Utah State to collaborate in research type uses and to have uses such as the West Point Center of Salt Lake Community College that's just down the road participate in events and programming here at this new development. So what is University Park? As mentioned, it's a collaboration between stakeholders and partners involved with the institutions of higher learning to create a park that is modeled upon other successful parks in the country. A prime example is one in North Carolina called Research Triangle Park. That's a collaboration between private developers, the University of North Carolina State, and Duke Universities. The key difference here, however, is that this park, the Ivory Foundation and the Board of Regents will donate all operating profits to scholarships for students at the state's universities and colleges. So to be clear, Ivory Development, the Ivory family, none of the Ivory for-profit businesses will benefit financially from this development. All of the revenues generated from the development will be donated in perpetuity to fund scholarships. And the gift to the Board of Regents of a significant portion of this land will be controlled by USHE and the institutions of higher learning. And also, they have committed that all the profits from all the profits and revenues that come from their operation of their acreage will be donated to scholarships in perpetuity. In fact, we have the representatives of USHE here. Their executive director is here tonight in support of this application, and we've appreciated their cooperation in being here and supporting us tonight. Go ahead. So, to give you an idea of what it will look like, you'll have the 440 acres, and a large portion of that will be controlled by the Board of Regents and USHE. And the other part will be controlled by the Ivory Foundation, with all of the money generated from the development going to scholarships. We view this as University Park is a legacy investment. It's not just another real estate development. It creates an ongoing stream of revenue in perpetuity to benefit Utah's students. Why is this a great project, not just for the university and USHE and the other institutions of higher learning? It's a great project for Salt Lake City. This is the type of development that will attract users that may go elsewhere and they'll stay here instead, and it will attract new users such as aerospace technology type companies and those types of high quality tenants that will make this a sort of a flagship development for Salt Lake City. And it will show a collaborative effort between a private foundation, academic and research institutions, and a progressive city to accomplish the goal of funding scholarships in perpetuity for Utah's students. So we're really excited about this project and this development. And we've invited Wade Budge, who's worked with staff on drafting the particular language of this BP overlay, to explain how it integrates the uses of Research Park into this site in the most effective way possible, while hopefully attempting to accommodate the interest of the other stakeholders, such as the Duck Club, the residents along 2200 West, and the airport. Wade?
Daniel did a great job of explaining, and we appreciate his staff report. It was very, very comprehensive. If there are any questions, I'd love to hear those, but let me just touch on 2 or 3 things. The comment about open space is really spot on. We think that by allowing through this BP overlay, the concentration of open space in certain areas will result in us having higher quality open space. We also think, given the proximity of wetlands and the Duck Club and bird production areas that are nearby, that with some of the language that we are proposing and that the staff has provided comments on, we have the opportunity to prioritize the creation of on-site mitigation that together with open space will make it so that these uses are harmonious and integrate well with the neighboring uses. We just want to also notice this, and that is the staff's recommendation of or suggestion of a positive recommendation is well-founded. And the reason is because right now this already is zoned BP. And by adding these additional uses, what we are achieving is a better integration with Research Park. That was really we had our eye towards the Research Park uses that exist and the tenants who are there right now. And what we thought is, how can we make it so that if they have expansion needs, they stay in Salt Lake? How is it that we can make it so that they'll want to come and expand into this Research Park West, or whatever name it ends up being branded with? And that was a motivation. At the same time, we wanted to reflect the kind of environmental values that have been developed. And for that reason, we have inserted the bird strike glass provisions that have already been discussed, as well as the other environmental incentives. I just wanted to highlight just 2 things, and then I'll pause for questions. The thing that I think is important is to recognize that we have a real opportunity here make sure that these improvements that are going to go in this area reflect the considerable effort done by prior planning commissions and decision makers in coming up with the area plan. The collector road and having that located through the middle of the project is one prime example, and that's why we added language to clarify that that's an obligation beyond just an aspiration in the area plan. The other thing that I would say is that by confirming that the berming needs to occur along the residential uses, we're implementing the concept that's found in the area plan, but making it a regulatory requirement in this BP overlay zone. So when you balance all the things that are being proposed against what we could do anyway, we are really finding a good balance that we think produces a high number of community benefits that would justify a positive recommendation tonight. Happy to answer any questions.
Sorry, are there any questions for the applicant?
More just a matter of curiosity. Thank you for your presentation, by the way. What's the approximate percent, or how big is this in relation to the current research park? And how
this
many
site's
square
440
feet?
acres, and the current research park is 350 acres.
It was larger.
Yes, and in fact, your question's well-founded. Part of the discussion that we had early on with the University of Utah was they've outgrown it in many ways. Some of the tenants they'd like to keep there are relocating outside of Research Park, even outside of Salt Lake City in some cases. So the hope is, then the plan and the vision is to help those types of users in Research Park have a place to go and be able to collaborate with USHE and the other institutions of higher learning who locate facilities here.
Thank you.
Any other? Yeah, okay.
So outside the light industrial and commercial uses, and then really I guess the ability to consolidate lots and use the 15% across, what can't you do under the current designation?
Yeah, let me speak to that.
That you need this done for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I would refer you to the staff report where we provided a summary of the uses that would be added. Some that jump to mind are the laboratory uses.
Yeah, I understand the uses,
And that's really it. It's really the addition of those uses. And in coming forward with a request for those additional uses, that's where we put a lot of thought into how can we make it so that the buffering is better? How can we make it so that we're addressing comments we received both from the electric utility and from the Duck Club members about trying to pursue on-site mitigation in areas that would be strategic. And so we added that language to the text. So more than just a concept, we added text to show how that would go into a regulatory document. So, you know.
No, that's helpful. I mean, yes, thanks.
And then there was one comment once where someone said, well, isn't this looking like M1? And it isn't. M1 has a whole host of uses that are not in this particular zone. We're not trying to have this be an M1 use. M1 has, I mean, I can give you examples. I have a line. They have uses such as check cashing. They have uses such as a correctional facility. They have uses such as rail facilities. They have uses such as grain elevators and impound lots. We don't have any of those. So we are staying very true to the business park use that is currently there and simply adding a number of uses that we think will help with that integration that we see as part of this donation that was described by Scott Bates here.
Thanks.
Is there any other questions for the applicant? I'm going to ask you to step back and we'll open a public hearing.
Thank you very much.
I know that. Yeah. Is there anyone from the West Point Community Council here to speak about this proposal? Thought I saw Dorothy a minute ago. There she is. I like the pumpkins. Can you state your names for us? And you will have 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Dan Thompson, a resident of 2200 West, community board member.
So maybe staff can help me with this, or Matt.
Dorothy, can we get your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry.
My time starts, so I'm not going to start that until I have. I've done this before. So we had submitted a letter before. It's on page 100 of the staff report. That's because all that information is done chronologically, and so it was toward the end. This reflects the changes that were made last week and is our latest response to that. So my name is Dorothy Owen. I am the chair of the West Point Community Council. West Point is the largest community council in Salt Lake City. We don't do boring is our motto. That's because we have the inland port, the new state correctional facility, the recreational athletic center, and the Salt Lake West Point campus in our area. We also have about 10,000 plus residents in the last agricultural land in Salt Lake City. We have spent over a year with Ivory Development on this. And I realize you guys have been here for a long time. You did a tour, you did a bunch of other things, you've been listening. So if you're not, I'm not surprised that you're not halfway as excited as you should be. We are not just excited, we are ecstatic. We know that we've always believed that development in the West Point area, that we could do better. And we have pushed for this for over a year and a half. And this project proves it. We started out a year ago with a little contention on what we saw when the M1 concept was presented. And we were looking at a bunch of warehouses, which wasn't going to do anything for adding the types of jobs we thought the West Side deserved, didn't take into account a lot of the environmental issues. You know, we thought we could do better. At that time, no one, absolutely no one, I think that everybody here will agree, ever thought that a year later we would come up with a proposal like this. It is much better than anything we would have thought we could have come up with under a best case scenario. It is proof that when government and developers and the community work together, we come up with stuff we didn't even think we could come up with. That's why this is important, and that's why we're excited, and that's why you should be excited, because you are key to making sure that the vision that we've worked so hard to develop happens. It would not have happened if it hadn't been for the tireless efforts of Ivory Development. It wouldn't have happened without the commitment of the Swanner family, who wanted to make sure their legacy was preserved and understood this land and what it meant. It wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the many residents and community council members who tirelessly, as volunteers, worked on this. They were committed, they didn't take the time, they made the time. And they worked together to do something that was much better than a bunch of warehouses, innovative, exciting, talks to education, talks to employment, and does what people are always concerned about. How do we get the West Side to be more equal? How do we address this disparity? We did not wring our hands. We worked together. We have a concrete vision, and we are here to help make that happen. This meeting today is about the overlay. And the overlay is the tool to help make this happen. If you don't have questions, it's because you've been here like way too long, because there's a lot of questions. But that's not the point at this point here. The point is, what do you, as the commission, need to do to help move this vision along? We basically came up with some guidelines on addressing the overlay, and we've put that in our letter here. And then we also, on the back, because you always keep it to one page, you guys, right? So on the back are our recommended modifications to the proposal. There's lots of parts to this. We didn't think we were going to list all the things we agree with, because as you can tell from Daniel's stuff, there's lots there, and we agree with a lot, and concur with that. These are the adjustments that we thought were important to be made, and we hope that you will include in your recommendation to the City Council. And they fall into 3 areas. One is, our first goal was that the overlay zoning should be deliberate and focused on the vision. And in doing so, you want to avoid generalities and inappropriate types of zoning that seeks to undermine its credibility and can be used to distort where we're going. So in that vein, we're asking that registered home daycare and home occupation should be stricken as allowable uses, because there are no homes in the area allowed. I mean, it makes no sense. If you have no homes, you don't need to deal with home occupations or home daycare.
So Dorothy, we need to move along.
Okay, so you can read all of this. That's why it's in writing, and that. You can talk to that. We'll answer any of those questions. And I think, as I wanted to close, I wanted to just end with this. So this, we had about, how many did we have printed out? I don't know, maybe 20 of these or 30 or something. We don't have a lot of money, so we didn't. Okay, we had printed these up 2 years ago when we held a public hearing at the State Fair Park that our legislative representatives put together to try to persuade the Utah State Legislature that cooperation with the local people is a good idea. They weren't totally receptive, but we didn't give up. We worked really hard, and I thought today when I came here, I was going to pull this out and say, this is no longer just a pipe dream. We have proved it works, and we want your help in making sure that our vision happens.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue?
But there are people here that want to.
Okay, I don't have any cards. If you have a card, can you please bring it up to me? That makes it easier for us to keep track of you. Or something. Register you. Okay. Thank you. All right. So Terry Marasco. All righty. Heidi Hoven. You have 2 minutes. 2 minutes until the buzzer goes off again.
Has it started? Can I sit?
He starts it when you sit down and say your name, please.
I am Heidi Hoven. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a wetland ecologist working for the National Audubon Society, where I help manage and conduct research at our Gilmore Sanctuary, nearly 4,000 acres of wetlands and uplands on Great Salt Lake, protected for shorebirds and waterbirds. These are contiguous to part of nearly 20,000 acres of managed wetlands west of the Ivory development property that are designated and globally important shorebird areas. These notes are supplementary to the comments that I submitted, and it's included in your report. So I'm going to get right down to business and say that first I would like to commend the intentions of the applicant's proposed zoning codes for bird-friendly elements, and you can see them listed there in the third paragraph, including wetland buffer, 50-foot setbacks, and so forth. I would also like to commend the inclusion of requiring a buffer and berm to wetlands by the staff that lie to the west of the project. However, in reviewing the recommendations of the staff report, I would like to provide clarification and comment on the setback or buffer distance, which was recommended at 60 feet, plus another 60 if you include the right-of-way. I am the lead author on what people call the SAMP, the Wetlands and Wildlife Functional Assessment, done in 2006. And the recommendation of 60 feet, as near as I can tell, was based on the wildlife activity protection zones largely, and which are outlined in the SAMP. But that was just one of the many steps to reach the final conservation area that was recommended in that work, and that work was scientifically founded, looked into the scientific literature or agency reports and experts that are local here. It was based on the 4 criteria you see listed on the front page. Oh, is that it?
That's it.
Is that 2 minutes?
You get, we'll give it, finish your
Okay,
thought.
so
You may
the
finish your
overview,
thought.
the overview is that there's more information leading behind. There are maps, a map in the back showing the conservation area that extends and wraps around the parcel, which is, you can easily tell with the red dashed line. And I included a table that shows the large distances of buffers needed for many species of birds that we have in great concentrations around this area, very, very close by. And the setback distance for infrastructure is not included in the model of the SAMP, but is listed here as a reference guide. So what I'm suggesting is that the buffer needs to be greater than 60 feet, not as great as these distances, but just to realize that these are sensitive species, and the disturbances that come along with these this development potential, which I think is a great idea, should be taken into consideration. There's other things on the second page if you would look at them too.
Thank you. Jack Ray? Can you state your name, please?
Excuse me. Thank you. My name is Jack Ray. I'm the president of the Utah Waterfowl Association, and I'm also here with the Rudy Reclamation, which is a duck club. So Rudy Reclamation this year is celebrating its 110th anniversary at a time when wetlands were called swamps, and the only good one was a drained one. These people preserved over 1,800 acres of habitat. Anyone who's out there, and I know a number of you have been, a number of people here have been out there, know that it's a natural marvel, and it's something that has been preserved in the face of pressures for development, for drainage. They have resisted the temptation to profit from their property and from their water, and they have provided consistently over 110 years habitat for wildlife. Their roots of conservation and preservation and nurturing the habitat extend deep into the landscape of this area, and they hope that that legacy will, branch far into the future. So there's another legacy here. We appreciate the proposal of Ivory and many of the steps and measures that they've taken. But there are 2 issues that need to be further addressed in order to preserve the legacy on both sides of the property boundary. One of those is the buffer, and Dr. Hoven has referred to that. 60 feet is inadequate. There are many species of shorebirds we've attached to our comments. Many of the dozens of species of birds that inhabit the areas that are close to 3200 West. Those species are often sensitive to human activity. And having a 60-foot high or 65-foot high building just 60 feet away, or even 100 feet away from those areas is going to significantly disrupt the wildlife activity and the ecological value of that habitat. Second, the height of the berm is inadequate. A berm of 5 feet high is ecologically inconsequential. It won't serve the purpose, even if it has a 6-foot wall on top of it. It needs to be much higher in order to provide buffering for the species. Salt Lake City has recognized the value and the utility of buffering when it developed its Northwest Quadrant plan and incorporated a buffer of several thousand acres in the Northwest Quadrant because of the significance of these buffers. And so there needs to be a bigger buffer here and a higher berm, significantly on both sides, so that that legacy is preserved. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. So I'd like to know, what would you suggest for a setback buffer and a height of a berm?
Right. So in terms of the berm, we suggest that the berm be 20 feet high with a 6-foot wall on top of it. It's important to realize that many of these species are very sensitive to human activity. And so if you have a lot of traffic, if you have the kinds of commotion and lighting that occurs, you need to have that type of thing. This is a sensitive area, and its sensitivity needs to be recognized in terms of the ordinances and the restrictions that are put into place. In terms of the buffer should be something between 300 and 500 feet. I know that sounds significantly larger, but recognize that the buffer in the northwest quadrant is well over a half a mile in size. So in terms, and these, here we have the sensitive areas literally right across the street from the proposed development, as opposed to the northwest quadrant where the proposed development is much further away. So those values need to be taken into consideration. We're
Thank
having
you.
discussions with Ivory, and, we would like to continue
Thank you
those
very much.
discussions. Thank you.
Mr. Marasco, Terry?
Excuse me. Terry Marasco. I'm a citizen of the city, working with the West Side folks for a couple of years around development. I'm a former educator with 2.9 degrees, and I want to speak to the education component that these folks have proposed. I became a businessman after I left education. More recently, I've been studying West Side and East Side schools by spending about 150 days in classrooms, figuring out what's going on in our school system. One of the commendations I see for this project is that, particularly on the West Side, where we have very many underperforming schools, that these kinds of education products are critical to the kids and the development of these kinds of jobs and these kinds of skills. So while that isn't a necessary component of planning, that a project like this is incredibly necessary for the folks on the West Side. And I think working with the West Point Community Council and the foundation to see that this happens would be something I'd be committed to, and I know Dorothy and her group is also. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue? On me? Anybody? Thank you. Bonnie? Okay.
We'll be short and sweet, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. In this paper that they had turned out to us.
Can you give us your name for the record? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Bonnie Christensen.
Thank you.
They had not allowed animal kennels. They're allowing veterinary clinics. I think it would be a good idea, and I tried to reach out to Mr. Budge and Mr. Bates, but no one replied back to me. I'm thinking that if we're going to allow a veterinary clinic in this business park, that we should also allow an animal clinic, an animal kennel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You don't have to have a card. But you do have to state your name for the record.
I can do that. Brady Frederickson, I'm a Director of Planning, Salt Lake City Department of Airports. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the Ivory design, and I've appreciated working with them over the last year. They've been more than gracious to talk about their development. The only thing that I would like to state is that all the uses that they are proposing typically fit and are compatible with the airport environment. The one thing that we'd like to see, and I've talked to Ivory about it, and they're amenable to put it into the overlay district, is that the development should also be subject, the development is subject to the airport flight path overlay district and to FAA regulations as well. So we'd like to see that in the ordinance, but other than that, they've been very
It
gracious.
is not in the airport overlay district at present?
It is.
So why wouldn't it already be subject to that?
It is subject to it. We just want to emphasize that.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else? Thank you. Come forward. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Linda Freitas. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Great Salt Lake. I sent to David a copy of my comments, and just for the record, I'd like to read the last paragraph because I think it sums it up quite nicely. I'd like to thank Ivory Development and Salt Lake City Planning Division for providing us with this unique opportunity to engage, inspire, and recognize the collective responsibility we all have. The responsibility to work openly and effectively in shaping our future, and the responsibility we have as stewards for our natural systems and the environment. We, Friends of Great Salt Lake and others, believe this process has the potential to serve as a model for helping to shape the future. And we invite Salt Lake City Planning Commission to champion the development of future ordinances that will achieve far-reaching examples for others to follow as we look to the future of this place. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I offer anyone else time for comment? If not, I will close the public hearing. Yeah. Yeah, no. Well, so I've just offered anyone else time if they would like it. So, hearing none, I will close the public hearing. So, and bring the applicant back up. And David, anyone else who wants to talk? Okay. Does the Planning Commission have any further questions about this proposal?
I do. Daniel, can you explain to me how we came to what permitted uses are allowed in the current BP zone?
That would go back a lot of years.
I guess let's just cut to that, Jason.
Okay.
What was the reasoning behind leaving out some of the things that are addressed in the overlay, like a laboratory, et cetera? They seem to me to be a natural extension of a business park, but I want to understand why they were left out.
I think there are some uses in there that were intentional. This gets a little technical, but the way our ordinance is divided into sections, it groups the BP zone with a number of other special zones into a land use table that lists specific uses. It may be unintentional that some of those are listed without a P next to them, including like a laboratory use. So I don't know that that was specifically intentionally left out as an allowed use. Some of those uses allowed in the BP zone are fairly general, like research and development. It's defined fairly broadly, and if a use like laboratory wasn't specifically listed, we could just say you fit within research and development. It gets fairly technical, but
no, that's what I want to hear. So does staff with the additional uses allowed in this overlay, does staff have any issues with any of those particular uses being allowed?
Not at this point. We had some initial issues with the uses they were proposing in July. There were a few fairly significant uses that we said these would be significantly different than the BP zone, and they took those out.
So based on the public comment that we've received and that we've read, it seems like some of the sticking points or some of the recommendations from the community is certain uses that get removed, such as gas stations, commercial parking, bus line yard and facilities. Does the applicant want those things to stay in for a particular reason? Or
I mean, for instance,
does that
the
hurt
animal
vision of the project?
Yeah, the animal kennel was one we thought we would remove. It doesn't matter if we add that back in.
I guess I'm actually more asking about the things that are proposed to be included that some people have asked to have removed. Hotel, motel, heliport. There's several that are listed in the public comments.
Yeah.
Are there things that should stay in?
So a hotel use, we would advocate to remain. The example would be the Marriott at University Park, at the Research Park now. The vision would include that kind of a hospitality facility in the new, the Research Park West or University Park at this site. The commercial parking lot was envisioned again because there's such uses at the current Research Park. And to your question, I don't know that it was ever contemplated that that would provide parking for airport users, but I guess potentially it could. And then, what was the other one, the other one you had a question about, Darren?
Well, there's several. What about the bus line yard and repair facility?
That was included with the thought that there could be buses with, operating with regard to programming between the University, Utah State, or the University of Utah. Buses could come on, and if they, and be parked there and repaired there minimally to help with programming from those universities. That was the intent, anyway.
And then in regard to the public comment about increased buffers and increased berm requirements,
I'll let Wade address that one.
Can you respond to that?
So, you know, we've been hesitant to suggest that a buffer on that west side should be delineated in a number of feet. That was the comment that was made by the Rudy Duck Club. The reason why is if you look at the staff report does a very good job of showing how there are two main power corridors in that area that happen to be located near the entrance to the Rudy Duck Club. We think that there's a possibility that once we get into a level of degree of study and analysis of wetlands and where we'd want to do on-site mitigation, we may have a buffer much larger than 60 feet near under those power corridors and near the Rudy Duck Club. But it wouldn't make sense to be having that same kind of general 60, 100, 200, or whatever number feet all the way down, particularly if you're bordering, for instance, the airport. It's not the same sort of value you're trying to protect. And so what we did is we put language in there saying, if you're going to be doing on-site mitigation, locate it next to the wildlife habitat. That's the regulatory requirement. But we wanted to leave flexible the number of feet so that we could achieve the optimal outcome once you get the technical folks in there, looking at the site, looking at what it requires, and looking what kind of, the way you would be locating that wetland mitigation area next to these neighboring uses.
In addition to that, I would say, and I don't want to speak for Jack, but in our conversations with Jack Ray and other representatives for the Waterfowl Association and the Duck Clubs, and also in talks with planning, there's been some discussion about the possibility of abandoning a portion of 3200 West altogether, which would probably provide a greater mitigation impact on the ecologically sensitive migratory and residential bird populations than the buffer and the berm. So we're open to that continuing dialogue.
I mean, that's what we view. We don't view that any recommendation tonight or any action by the council as the end of the discussion. This is a project which is being established as a legacy project, and we will need to be working with the stakeholders on an ongoing basis.
So, do you have a master plan for this property?
No. It's the scope. One thing I probably didn't do a good job of was touching on the scale of this project. It's 440 acres. It's bigger than the current research park.
Right.
So that type of detailed planning and master plan hasn't occurred, other than the part of the vision is to donate the best of the acreage to the Board of Regents, and to have that centralized hub and programming for university-type research park uses be closest to the neighbors. That's a general vision of what the plan would look like.
So I'm going to ask Daniel this question, which is the research park, the current research park at the university is sui generis of a particular place in time, let's put it that way, about 25, 30 years ago kind of time, in terms of urban planning and best practices and so forth. All of the buildings sit by themselves. They're all surrounded by parking, by useless landscape. I mean useless landscape. And so the reason I'm asking about the master planning issues is because I think there's a huge opportunity here to incorporate more sensitive landscaping, more, less parking, more attention in particular to transit, because I don't know how many people will work here or come here, but if it's like the research park, it's going to be thousands of people, and that for them all to come through the cars, I think is not a very sensitive So it seems to me here, and I'm actually a little bit sensitive about this point, because I was on the commission when we approved some of the issues that have later come back to bite us on the Northwest Quadrant. So I'm paying a lot more attention, let's put it that way, to some of the potential problems that could arise. And I guess I'm going to ask staff and sort of what are the guidelines for this district that would prevent some of these things from happening, from the sort of style of development that is, you know, what I'm calling the 1995 version of research parks and so forth.
I think one of the primary issues was the open space requirement. That in of itself ends up taking up a lot of the lot and creating that traditional business park environment. So the allowance to modify that and put that in another area allows them to have more of a dense development pattern than would otherwise be allowed with the business park.
Does this particular overlay zone, what would be the parking requirements for this?
The standard, if you use like an office building, you're at 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. They're fairly, I mean, they match the other parking requirements in the city, which are all over the place. I don't know.
Well, we were just looking at the parking element, so I think
Yeah.
we're pretty familiar with where we stand on that right now. But 3 per 1,000 is more like in line with 2000. Year 2000 rather than the year 2020. So that's something that, I mean, I'm very cautious about going forward that, and I know the intention is wonderful, and I recognize that the community is really appreciating this tremendously, but but the pictures are the stuff that we are able to see right now. Gives me no assurances, really, that would be any different.
And I'm going to add a little bit. The location of this isn't next to any prime transit corridors, so it's not served right now. So there would be the expectation that you would need parking, at least initially, and until we actually had transit connections to the site that were significant, that bring people throughout the valley, not just from the University Research Park to this Research Park West.
Well, and creating an entirely new employment center in a place where there's no transit is questionable.
I can speak a little bit to, or maybe just add some comments on Research Park and that development pattern. Our Research Park zoning isn't necessarily what has fully encouraged that development pattern. Research Park has very strict kind of covenants for everything that's developed up there, you know, right down to the type of landscaping that has to be installed. They're very much rethinking that development pattern up there now and in the process of remaster planning that whole area. But, you know, our Research Park zoning is pretty much, there's some front yard setback, there's some rear yard setback, it's all 20 feet or so. So those development patterns you see up there aren't necessarily because of our zoning. It's something that the University of Utah and the Research Park put in place.
So the 20-foot setback says you're not going to have a pedestrian-oriented street or a pedestrian-oriented research area where people could, you know, be in the lab 1 minute and be in a restaurant another.
Madam Chair, would you mind if I ask the applicant a question? Along this line of thinking with research parks, there are specific provisions in state code that, with respect to research park and with respect to property owned by the state of Utah, that would remove that from the city's jurisdiction as far as regulating land use. Would the applicant be willing, you mentioned that you may be transferring some of this to the University of Utah. Would you be willing to record a deed restriction against the property that would lock in the uses that we're talking about for this new district?
I mean, I think the answer to that is we want to have this be one project. And we highlighted the fact that there will be a donation component because we think that's important to show that we're trying to have the university be the spearhead or the main concept over which all the rest of the development then revolves. And so there won't be a distinction, if you will, between what's owned by ultimately the state and what's owned by the private sector. We can certainly evaluate that, and we'll need to talk with the principals of the foundation.
In theory, there won't be a difference, but the state has made clear to us in many instances that they don't care what we think as far as
Right.
land use regulation goes. And
Right.
if you transfer that property to them, then they can do whatever they want
Yeah.
under their sovereign jurisdiction.
Yeah, so I think this is a real good opportunity to show how the city in it pursuing this particular project in approving an overlay for this type of use is really wanting to see one project within the overlay. That's one of the additions we added to the regulatory language, is to say that once the city makes the election to apply this particular BP1 overlay to an area, that becomes a project. And so then folding in something more to achieve what Paul talked about, I think that's something worth exploring. But, I just wanted to highlight that particular element of the proposed ordinance language, because that's our intent, is to show that that is the project.
So I don't understand that. Can you explain that?
So one of the questions is this. So when you get into the point of then master planning where you're going to put your open space, you have to make sure that you bring forth your first plat. You have to identify an additional area where you're going to be dedicating the open space. And what you want to do is by saying that the overlay is creating the boundaries of the project, you now know how many acres you need to be aiming for to show that you're meeting the 15% threshold. We didn't want to have a scenario, not that there have been scenarios with other projects and other developers where they say the 15% will be achieved ultimately in the last phase. And by the time you get there, it's maybe changed ownership hands. And so one of the things we built in with the help of the staff is the concept of we're establishing a single project with this one overlay.
So in that sense, there's more or less a requirement for a master plan.
Indeed.
At least a skeleton type of master plan.
Well, and that's what I was going to say.
Where you start.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that the comment made by Vice Chair about that particular, about master planning is well taken. We're looking for those kind of comments because once we get a rezone approved, then we can go to the foundation and say it's time to now invest in the master plan. And some of the comments we heard from Planning Commission and that we need to account for before we start bringing in plats is, how are we going to tie all these pieces together? How are we going to try and anticipate future transportation needs? How is it that we're going to try and emphasize pedestrian uses? How is it that we're going to try and provide meaningful open space locations? So yeah, we're hearing you loud and clear that that's got to be the next step.
Vice Chair, could I make one important clarification?
Yes.
Please?
I'm
Oh, sorry.
Voice from wherever. Yes, okay, sorry.
To Attorney Nelson's point and one of his comments, I need to make it very clear that this donation is going to the Board of Regents. It's not going to the University of Utah or any particular institution of higher learning. It's going to the Board of Regents. And then USHE, the Utah System of Higher Education, will coordinate development by the various institutions of the portion donated.
Can I ask our attorney whether or not that would change?
Well, it won't.
That would change.
I don't know necessarily. It won't change
relationship.
his legal concern or
Right.
but the Board of Regents would want that made clear.
Right. And I don't know that this issue is ripe enough yet for right here. I just wanted to ask the question. I think it's something that the City Council may be more concerned about. I'm not sure that the Board of Regents can hold property. I'm not familiar enough with that part of the.
You mean as separate from?
As separate from the university or the state of Utah or
yeah,
DFCM or DCF.
Yeah, DFCM. You got your acronym right.
We'll let that sit on the table
right.
for a while. Okay.
I just wanted to bookmark the issue.
Right.
Also, Vice Chair, to follow up on your point earlier, and Planning Manager Mills commented, and I'm glad he brought it up, about how the development that's occurred at Research Park doesn't necessarily reflect the zone and wasn't created by the zone. In our discussions with the University of Utah and discussing the vision for this project, The University of Utah has gone to great lengths to remaster plan their existing research park up there and address some of the very points that you've raised. And so those points are in mind as we do start to master plan and work with the Board of Regents and the various institutions in developing this site. So many of those points that you've raised are on our minds and on our radar, and we hope to address and, make this development better than the current research park.
I think that, perhaps one of the things you showed the Research Triangle Business Park, and, our particular zoning actually shows exactly the University Research Park images in the thing. So perhaps it's better to emphasize better examples as you go forward.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions for the applicant?
Well, I think that I mean, Darren kind of went over some of them, but between the two documents that we received, there's a pretty extensive list of concerns based on what is being proposed by the overlay and what the community through the community council, as well as the bird organizations have clearly put a lot of thought into some of these proposed changes. And I know that some of them address things that might be already permitted within the business park. And maybe, Darren, that's what you were trying to parse, was between what was already permitted versus what was already changed. Because it looks like the community is wanting to do some changes that would ultimately impact what is already allowed. But I think that there are some interesting components to them. And I don't know if we want to spend the time to go point by point, but, like the gas station being a permitted use versus being a conditional use, with the environmental concerns, looking at, issues related to mobile food businesses and how that might impact wildlife. They seem like things that are manageable, and I don't know if this is the right point in which to address each one of those things, but I don't see anything unreasonable in here, but it speaks to just what you need, and maybe we need to have you go through this list if you haven't already and say, no, this is unacceptable, or this is okay.
I mean, we got this today, this afternoon.
Well, some of these we got today.
Okay.
So I'm happy to take comment from the group if the group would, from the Planning Commission on this. We didn't, for instance, registered home daycare and home occupation, we agree that doesn't need to be involved because there will be no residences. We just didn't bother to put it in the prohibited column. We're happy to do that. Place of worship institutional, there might be some sort of study area or something like that, but again, that's in the zoning district.
So I'm just wondering, Wayne, how we've handled some of these type of things in the past is if we make a recommendation consistent with the staff there, that we also just add that the caveat that the city council take an additional look at these type of things.
Yeah, that's something you can do. You could, that would move it along to the city council and allow them to start considering the issue, and you can put that condition on there that they please consider the community's concern in the land uses. It'd be helpful with the more information that you have to pass along. If you have some concerns specifically with some, it would be good to
getting this right now, this additional stuff, is hard for us as a commission to sift through.
Right.
Along with the applicant, that I just feel like that might be a better approach, is we recognize these are important, and we want the applicant to take this time in between us and the city council so you have answers, but that the city council gets a note from us of we want you to look at these comments we've received from the community.
Sure.
And then you're ready for them.
That'd be great.
That'd be great.
And I just don't feel prepared or qualified to parse through all of this right now, because it's hard to get it, listen, and digest it.
Is it better to to table it though and have them go work that out and come back to us so that we can then put a more finished product toward to the city council, or is this something?
Question. I guess that's the question. And in the past, I think we have punted that with the caveat to the city council, like, we think you should look at this.
Yeah.
Make sure you look at this part.
What would be more useful to the city council, I guess, is the question. Do you know?
I think doing it that way would be fine, of getting it to the city council and saying this was brought to the attention and we think city council should take this into consideration in making their final decision.
But city council has their own public hearing.
Right.
Oh,
For
they
the-
have
for
their
this.
full
So they
public
have the
process.
opportunity at that time to hear from these people as well.
Yeah, the city.
I'm a little uncomfortable punting it up to city council rather than tabling it, because I feel like if we tabled it, we could get a response from staff and from the applicant to these things specifically, and they could probably work it out pretty easily with their knowledge of what's going on here. And so I know nobody likes to table things.
Right.
But that's,
And
that's a
applicants don't
concern.
like that either.
I mean, for me, I mean, I agree with Amy in a lot of it. I mean, these questions about the berm height and there's two problems. One problem is that we're making a change that while we've got the applicant's intent, even if the foundation decides not to move forward, they sell the land, that these impacts are still going to happen on these properties, right? So I appreciate the applicant's intent, and I have full faith believe they're going to follow through, but if they don't, what we're applying here is going to happen. And I don't know if I could ever really get an answer that I would feel qualified to make an assessment on the berm height or the length between, the buffer zone, that I would feel like, I mean, you guys could make one argument and the community could make another argument, and I don't know if I ever really could distill down which one would be meaningful. And so, I mean, I'm ready and prepared to move this forward. I mean, the conditions or things I would ask the city council to consider would be increasing the berm height and the buffering and what's appropriate, and exploring that question, further exploring the questions on the deed restrictions. And then I think there's the 5 that the community council lists that they should be considered as not making them permitted, but as conditional uses, which is the bus line yard repair facility, the vehicle truck repair, the financial institutions, the package delivery facility, and the parking and commercial. I'm not convinced that those are needed necessarily in a vision for what's being presented. Mm-hmm. I think there are impacts that could happen should you guys not move forward with your plan, that having a conditional use, having the ability to be a conditional use where we would have some say in it, because they still could be moved forward. You just have to deal with a little bit of process. Would at least kind of protect the community's concerns and what I think is a legitimate one with traffic and air pollution and other questions of, what happens in that area should you guys not move forward. And so those are the 3 things that I would recommend the city council take a further look at in their considerations, but I am willing to move it forward if other members of the commission are too.
Could we amend the motion to say these 5 things would be conditional uses?
Yeah, I would
recommend
accept
that?
those 5 things being conditional. I haven't made a motion. I mean, I could, but
Good.
I mean, I would be fine with those being changed to be conditional. I don't think it really impacts the applicants in a meaningful way.
Correct.
It does add some protection to the community, and should the applicant not go forward, it does add some protection. Gives us more strength to make sure something good goes in there.
I agree with Amy, though, that I think a little bit of additional process, maybe it's between staff, the applicant, and the community to determine what are appropriate permitted and conditional uses. And I don't know that we can determine that tonight. I think we could take the 5 that the community council recommend, but whether or not those are appropriate, I don't feel qualified to determine. So I think it'd be great if that was further considered. I personally, first of all, I think the project is fantastic. I really hope it goes through, and I really appreciate you for bringing this. And I think the public comment was actually some of the most informed and professional public comment I've heard on any issue, so thank you for those of you that spoke. I want the project to move forward, but I also want the public comment to be recognized, and I don't feel that I'm qualified to determine which of the public comments need to be implemented and which do not. So I would ask that staff and the applicant sift through those things.
Are you moving to table?
No, I would say we move it to the city council with the recommendation that staff and the applicant refine the proposal and the city council to look at, I think the three things were berm height, buffer width, and the list of permitted and conditional uses, with further study and refinement to those three
Would we
items.
be entertaining a motion like that, Commissioner?
Yes. Okay, I will make a motion if I can get to that sheet. Okay. Based on the information in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council approve the proposed amendments PLN PCM 2018-00865 Business Park-I Overlay Zoning Map Amendment and PLN PCM 2019-00677 Business Park-I Overlay Zoning Text Amendment with the conditions noted in the staff report. Conditions are copied below for reference. Do I need to read them all?
No.
Okay, as noted in the staff report. And with the additional recommendation that staff and the applicant study three additional items, one being the berm height, the second being the buffer width, and the third being the list of permitted and conditional uses, and that the city council consider those things in their decision.
And what about
That came out wrong.
what about a deed restriction?
Is
your motion?
No, I do not include that in my motion.
With, sorry.
Go.
In respect to the list of uses, can you be a little bit more specific? And are you talking about the document that was submitted that listed the suggested uses to be removed?
Yeah, in regard to the two documents that were submitted, one by the West Point Community Council and one by Dr. Heidi Hoven.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking for a second.
I'll second.
The motion has been made by Darren and seconded by Amy. Is there any further discussion? Alrighty then. Let me get I lost my list. Okay. John?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Amy?
So first of all, I just want to commend you, Wade, that you got Dorothy to be enthusiastic about something that's positive, and that's a big deal. So you still have a lot of work ahead of you, but I feel confident that you all can rise up to that and meet this challenge and do something good, so I vote yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Since there are no additional agenda items, we are adjourned.